The Vatican, often perceived as a beacon of spiritual sanctity, conceals layers of history and secrets that challenge conventional understanding. Beyond its grand facade and sacred rituals, untold stories and hidden truths lie buried, waiting to be uncovered. These narratives, ranging from ancient mysteries to modern controversies, invite us to question what we truly know about one of the world's most influential institutions. Prepare to delve into the enigmatic world of the Holy See, where faith, power, and the unexplained converge. The Forbidden Black Magic Book. Among the most feared and controversial ancient texts in Western legend is the Grand Grimoire, also known as the Red Dragon. Oral traditions and archaeological references suggest this manuscript contains rituals for summoning demons, including Lucifer himself. While its true origin remains a mystery, some scholars place its first appearance in the year 15th century, while others argue for a later printing around the year 18th century or even later. Much of its content is thought to be based on pseudepigraph texts attributed to King Solomon, who was believed to possess supernatural knowledge and command spirits. Inside, the book details formulas, invocations, and rituals for summoning entities from the invisible realm. What makes the Grand Grimoire truly remarkable is not just its content, but the deep concern surrounding its actual existence and the question of where the original might be stored. Rumors persist that an original copy is kept within the Vatican's top secret archive. Some believe this preservation is a form of control, preventing dangerous knowledge from falling into the wrong hands. Others suggest the Church needs to study and understand the forces it opposes. However, no official documentation confirms the Grand Grimoire's presence in the Vatican. It remains an enduring rumor. The continued speculation highlights humanity's fascination with forbidden knowledge and the power it might confer. UFO and the Vatican. Discussions around unidentified flying objects, UFOs, have recently transitioned from fringe fiction to serious consideration by governments and the scientific community alike. A prominent figure in this shift is David Grush, a former intelligence officer with the United States Air Force who served in the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. Grush made a shocking claim. The Vatican once held the remains of a UFO that crashed in Italy just before World War II. According to Grush, in the late year 1930s, a mysterious flying object reportedly fell near Magenta, a town close to Milan in northern Italy, then under dictator Benito Mussolini's rule. Grush alleges that Mussolini ordered the site kept secret and the wreckage hidden for years. The most striking detail of Grush's claim involves the Vatican. He stated that, after World War II, Pope Pius XII secretly informed the U.S. government of the UFO's existence, leading to a covert U.S. operation to retrieve and transport the object to America for classified study. No clear information has emerged about where the object was taken or what was discovered from it, and the Vatican has never confirmed any of these claims. When pressed for evidence, Grush cited access to classified documents and direct conversations with individuals present at the UFO's recovery. But due to security restrictions, he could not release names or specific documentation. While many remain skeptical, dismissing it as another conspiracy theory, others believe that if any institution could discreetly keep such a secret for nearly a century, the Vatican would be among them. The enduring silence from the Vatican only deepens this mystery, raising the question: if the Vatican witnessed an event capable of reshaping humanity's understanding of life beyond Earth, why have they kept it hidden? The Vatican's Time Machine. A peculiar story that the Vatican has never officially confirmed nor fully denied is the tale of a time machine known as the Chronovisor. The narrative begins with Father Pellegrino Ernetti, an Italian priest, scholar of sacred music, and exorcist. In the year 1960s, Ernetti claimed to have been part of a secret Vatican group comprising priests and scientists who reportedly built a device allowing its user to view past historical events as if watching recorded footage. Father Ernetti even stated he personally used the device to witness the crucifixion of Jesus Christ and claimed to have taken a photograph of the moment, though the image was never authenticated. No one else ever saw the Chronovisor, and the Vatican has never released any evidence proving its existence. Despite the lack of proof, the story persists within paranormal research circles. Some believe that if real, the chronovisor could be a dangerous tool, especially if it fell into the wrong hands, as it could be used to observe, manipulate history, or fabricate evidence for personal agendas. Others argue that Ernetti might have invented the story for attention. Regardless of its veracity, the chronovisor remains an unresolved mystery tied to the Vatican. The very idea challenges our understanding of time and history, prompting reflection on the potential implications of such a device if it were real. The City of the Dead. Deep beneath the grandeur of St. Peter's Basilica lies an ancient city of the dead, a necropolis steeped in silence, shadow, and centuries of forgotten history. Known as the Vatican Necropolis, this burial ground is located about 5 levels beneath the basilica's current floor. Archaeologists discovered this vast site, dating back to the year 1st century AD, during the height of the Roman Empire. The earliest tombs belonged to pagan Romans, those who had not yet embraced Christianity. Higher up, researchers uncovered another burial layer from around the year 5th century, a critical transitional period when Christianity gradually began to replace ancient pagan beliefs in Europe. In this layer, tombs with blended features were found, showcasing pagan symbols alongside Christian crosses, a testament to a time when 2 spiritual worlds coexisted. What has been found here is not merely archaeological debris. It tells a complex story of faith, historical transformation, and the profound link between death and salvation. In a stunning revelation, among these ancient structures, researchers also found the remains of a medieval church directly beneath the present-day St. Peter's Basilica floor, suggesting the site served as a sacred center for centuries before the modern basilica was built. The basilica we see today is, in truth, only the uppermost layer of a legacy built over 2,000 years. At the heart of the complex is a special chamber believed by the Vatican to contain the remains of St. Peter, the apostle regarded as the first pope. While this theory remains debated, it underscores the site's profound significance to both the history and faith of the Catholic Church. Today, the necropolis is more than an archaeological relic. It is a living monument to how religion and power were built, layer by layer, stone by stone. Beneath the church's grand architecture and sacred light, a silent world endures, holding untold stories buried in the darkness, waiting to be discovered. The mysterious death of Pope John Paul. In September the year 1978, the Catholic world was shaken by an unprecedented event in modern history. Pope John Paul I died suddenly, just 33 days after his election as St. Peter's successor. Known as a humble and modest man, he had already won the love of millions worldwide in that short time. However, his abrupt passing opened the door to a series of questions that have never been satisfactorily answered. Initial reports about his death were rife with contradictions. Some claimed he suffered a heart attack while sleeping, while others insisted his health had been perfectly stable until his death. To this day, no official autopsy has ever been performed. John Paul I was seen as a reform-minded leader, and many believe he was preparing to confront one of the darkest corners of Vatican affairs, the Vatican Bank. The bank had long been suspected of being at the center of numerous financial scandals spanning decades. According to several researchers, the new pope had begun asking difficult questions about the Vatican Bank, which may have placed him in real danger. At the time, one of the most powerful figures managing the Holy See's finances was Bishop Paul Marcinkus, head of the Institute for Works of Religion, or the Vatican Bank. Under his leadership, the bank became embroiled in accusations of money laundering, shady investments, and massive unexplained loans. These scandals were tied to Roberto Calvi, a central figure in Banco Ambrosiano, an Italian bank whose collapse later sent shockwaves through the financial world. Calvi, a member of P2, a secretive lodge accused of manipulating Italian politics and finance, was found hanging from a bridge in London in the year 1982. Though his death was officially ruled a suicide, suspicions of assassination persist. Marcinkus himself was later investigated and accused of complicity in the bank's collapse, which resulted in losses totaling $3.5 billion. Although no official evidence has been produced, many believe Pope John Paul I became a threat to powerful interests. One theory suggests he was poisoned to prevent any potential purge of the Vatican's financial network. Adding to the suspicion is the Vatican's refusal to allow an autopsy and the tight control of information surrounding his death. To this day, The death of Pope John Paul I remains one of the great unanswered questions in the modern history of the Church. Did he die of a natural heart attack? Or had he opened a door that others never wanted touched? The Vatican's enduring silence only makes this mystery harder to explain than ever before. The Egyptian obelisk, at the heart of the Vatican. At the center of St. Peter's Square, a towering stone column pierces the sky. This is the Vatican obelisk, one of the square's most striking and oldest standing monuments. Yet, few realize this stone pillar did not originate in Rome, nor was it erected by the Church. It came from an ancient city on the banks of the Nile, Heliopolis, once a center of sun worship in Egyptian civilization. This obelisk is over 3,000 years old, originally raised by Egyptians to honor their gods. It once stood beneath the burning African sun, a silent witness to Pharaoh's solemn processions. In the year 1st century AD, the infamous Roman Emperor Caligula, one of the empire's most brutal rulers, ordered the great stone monument brought to Rome. He had a special ship built solely for its transport across the Mediterranean, treating it as a trophy of conquest and a symbol of imperial power. It was erected at the Circus of Nero, an arena where some of the earliest Christians were brutally executed publicly. Historical records indicate Saint Peter himself was executed at this site, just steps from the obelisk. For a long time, Romans executed Christian believers here in the shadow of the Egyptian stone, a cruel mockery of their faith. Centuries later, as the circus fell into ruin, the ground around the obelisk gradually became a burial site for Christian martyrs. This sacred ground would eventually become the foundation for St. Peter's Basilica. Not until the year 1586, under Pope Sixtus V, was the obelisk moved to its current position at the center of St. Peter's Square. Relocating a stone weighing over 300 tons was an unprecedented engineering feat, mobilizing over 900 workers, hundreds of horses, and an elaborate pulley system for months. Since then, the obelisk transformed from a pagan symbol into a witness to Catholicism's enduring faith, a monument to Christianity's triumph over violence and persecution. Today, thousands of tourists pass through the square, often unaware that this Egyptian stone once watched over the spilled blood of Christianity's earliest followers. It is not merely an ancient structure. It is a silent witness carrying a story far greater than what the eye can see. St. Peter's Bones. In the year 2013, under the dazzling light of St. Peter's Square, a solemn ceremony unfolded. For the first time in history, the Vatican publicly displayed a small stone box containing 8 bone fragments. These bones are believed to belong to St. Peter, the first pope in the history of the Catholic Church. The ceremony was led by Pope Francis himself. For many of the faithful, that moment held profound spiritual meaning, as if 2,000 years of history had converged, allowing modern eyes to glimpse a piece of the man considered the foundation of Christian faith. However, behind this reverence lies a truth that remains unverified. The bones were discovered in the year 1939 during an excavation beneath St. Peter's Basilica, found inside a sealed niche near the apostles' traditionally believed burial site. Yet, no independent scientific verification has ever been permitted. In the year 1968, Pope Paul VI declared that faith is reasonable, but admitted conclusive proof could not be provided. In the decades that followed, the Vatican remained silent about the relic's true origin. According to author Bruno Bartoloni, who researched extensively within the Vatican, no pope has ever allowed scientists to examine the bones using modern methods. Some internal documents even suggest St. Peter's tomb carries a millennium-old curse, threatening terrible misfortune upon anyone who disturbs it. Whether the curse is real or not, the Vatican has shown no urgency in probing too deeply. Perhaps for them, the spiritual and symbolic value of these bones outweighs the need for scientific validation. Or perhaps the truth is something the Church is not prepared to face. This ongoing mystery underscores the tension between scientific inquiry and deeply held religious belief. The Pope Prisoners. The story of the Pope Prisoners begins in the year 1871, when the Kingdom of Italy successfully unified the nation and seized the Papal States, vast territories under the Pope's control for centuries. With the aim of secularizing the country, the Italian government passed the Law of Guarantees, promising to protect the Pope's dignity while simultaneously stripping the Vatican of its political authority. For Pope Pius IX, the head of the Church at the time, This was unacceptable. He refused to recognize the new government, declared himself a prisoner in the Vatican, and issued a decree of excommunication against the king. From that moment forward, the Pope would not leave Vatican grounds, and the Italian state would not step inside. A political deadlock began, lasting nearly 6 decades. During this time, popes lived, worked, and carried out their religious duties confined to just a few hectares of Vatican land, completely severed from official contact with the rest of Italy. The Vatican became a world unto itself, isolated, enclosed, and symbolically at odds with the nations surrounding it. This standoff finally ended in the year 1929 with the signing of the Lateran Treaty between Pope Pius XI and Italy's then leader Benito Mussolini. The agreement recognized the Vatican as an independent sovereign state with full political and diplomatic rights. In return, the Church agreed to relinquish its claims over the lost papal territories. The Lateran Treaty not only resolved nearly 60 years of tension, but laid the foundation for the modern Vatican as we know it today, a tiny state with immense global religious influence, where the Pope is no longer seen as a prisoner, but as a sovereign head of state. This historical period illustrates the enduring struggle between spiritual authority and temporal power, culminating in the unique sovereign status of Vatican City. Jesus' death certificate. For centuries, the Shroud of Turin has remained one of the most debated and captivating religious artifacts globally. It is not merely an old piece of cloth. It is a symbol of suffering, death, and the undying hope of millions of Christian believers. Tradition holds that this was the cloth used to wrap Jesus' body after his crucifixion, bearing a faint imprint of a man with wounds matching biblical descriptions. The shroud was first officially recorded in the year 1354 in France, becoming a focal point of endless research, debate, and reverence. In the year 1988, 3 independent laboratories used radiocarbon dating to determine the fabric's age. The results were shocking. The cloth appeared to date back only to the year 13th or the year 14th century, hundreds of years after Jesus' time. For some, this was clear evidence that the shroud was a medieval creation, perhaps a ritual object or symbolic artwork. However, for the Vatican, the story did not end there. In a later study, Barbara Frail, a researcher from the Vatican Secret Archives, claimed to have discovered faint traces of writing on the shroud's surface, previously unnoticed. Through high-intensity image analysis, she asserted she could make out fragments of text in ancient Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, arranged without clear structure, but repeating the message. This is the burial shroud of Jesus of Nazareth. According to Frail's theory, the cloth may have served not only as a burial covering, but also as a rudimentary death certificate, as it was not uncommon in Roman times to affix or write identifying information directly onto burial shrouds. She suggested the inscriptions might have been hastily written by an official after the execution, confirming identity and cause of death. Even so, her discovery has not gained broad scientific acceptance, partly due to the ambiguity of the evidence, and partly because the shroud has become too sacred for further testing and controversy. For the Vatican, the cloth no longer needs to prove anything. Its value lies not in scientific conclusions, but in the depth of faith it continues to inspire. The Pope escape tunnels. Hidden among the Vatican's ancient stone structures and high surrounding walls is a passage almost no one notices, a quiet pathway running along the fortified perimeter. It is known as the Passetto di Borgo, or more dramatically, the Pope's escape tunnel. From the outside, it appears unremarkable, just a long stone wall like countless other medieval defenses across Europe. But within it lies a narrow corridor stretching nearly 800 meters, directly connecting the Vatican to Castel San Angelo, a former mausoleum of Emperor Hadrian later transformed into a papal fortress and sanctuary. Construction of the Passetto di Borgo began in the year 9th century under Pope Nicholas III, taking more than 6 centuries to complete. It was more than an architectural feat. It was a strategic declaration that in times of instability, the head of the church needed an escape route. And at one point in history, that escape route proved to be a lifeline. In the year 1527, Rome plunged into one of its darkest chapters, the sack of Rome by Emperor Charles V's forces. The city fell into chaos, with churches looted and monks, worshippers, and innocent civilians slaughtered in the streets. Amidst the anarchy, Pope Clement VII was forced to flee for his life. The passetto became his only means of survival, carrying him out of the Vatican in secrecy and safety. Today, the tunnel still exists, occasionally open to the public on special occasions. Walking beneath its shadowy arches, with footsteps echoing against the ancient stone, one can almost picture a pope rushing through the darkness, searching for light. The passetto is a tangible link to the Vatican's volatile past, a reminder that even supreme spiritual authority often required very earthly means of protection. Vatican and the secrets buried beneath. Beneath the very stones of Vatican City lies a vault of knowledge preserved through centuries, known today as the Vatican Apostolic Archive. Until recently, it bore a more evocative name, the Vatican Secret Archive. The renaming, initiated by Pope Francis a few years ago, aimed to dispel the cloud of suspicion and intrigue that long surrounded its contents. Yet, the name change could not erase the deeper question that continues to linger. What secrets is the Vatican still hiding? This archive is believed to contain millions of pages of documents spanning over 1,200 years, from papal decrees and diplomatic correspondence to court records and obscure chronicles of mysterious, even inexplicable events. Some believe it holds texts recounting encounters with extraterrestrial beings, records of supernatural miracles, and fragments of forgotten knowledge from lost civilizations. The Vatican claims the archive is now open to scholars, and theoretically, anyone can submit a request to access original materials. In reality, however, the application process is rigid and highly selective. Not everyone is allowed in, and even for those granted access, only a small fraction of the vast collection is available for viewing. Some documents have indeed been made public, including Galileo's, the year 1633 trial transcript, or Mary, Queen of Scots' letter to Pope Sixtus V, just before her execution. These reveal the archive's immense historical value, but also raise a sobering question. If these alone were enough to shake our understanding of the past, what secrets lie within the materials that remain sealed? Today, the Vatican is attempting to digitize portions of the archive, but progress is painstakingly slow due to the overwhelming volume of material. Some scholars suggest the most unusual records, those referring to UFO sightings or unexplained phenomena, likely remain tucked away in corners rarely accessible. One researcher even remarked, "It's not that the Vatican doesn't have documents on strange events. The problem is they no longer know where to find them." Some liken the Vatican Apostolic Archive to a CIA vault for the Church, where the public sees only the tip of the iceberg, while the most significant pieces are kept carefully and permanently hidden. Whether the Vatican truly conceals great secrets about history, religion, or even life beyond Earth remains uncertain. But with 53 miles of shelves packed with records, much remains unseen by the outside world. The True Cross. Among the most sacred religious relics within the Vatican, few spark as much debate as the True Cross, believed to be a piece of wood that once held the crucified body of Jesus Christ. According to Catholic tradition, after Jesus' execution, the cross was preserved and eventually divided into smaller fragments. One such fragment is now kept at the Vatican, displayed as a holy relic that draws thousands of pilgrims annually. Legend states the original cross was made from 3 types of wood: cedar, pine, and cypress with. Some texts even claiming these trees grew together on sacred land that once held the foundations of the Temple of Jerusalem. It is a story rich in symbolism, but one question continues to stir controversy. How can anyone be sure the remaining wood is truly part of the original cross? To this day, there is no definitive scientific evidence confirming the artifact's precise origin. Modern tests like carbon dating have never been publicly conducted on the surviving fragments. Part of the reason is the Church's desire to protect the relic's sanctity, as testing would require taking samples, potentially causing irreversible damage. Outside the Vatican, numerous churches and monasteries worldwide also claim to possess pieces of the True Cross. According to some researchers, the number of fragments claimed would be enough to reconstruct several dozen full-size crosses, raising serious doubts about the authenticity of each individual piece. Yet, for many believers, the value of these fragments lies not in their material authenticity, but in the faith surrounding a sacred story that has endured for over 2,000 years. For them, witnessing an object believed to have touched Christ is in itself a deeply spiritual experience. The tension between scientific verification and deeply held faith remains central to the mystique of the true cross. The Vatican and the Holocaust. For decades, the Vatican's role during World War II, particularly under Pope Pius XII, has remained a deeply controversial subject. Many scholars and historians have criticized the Pope for maintaining silence as the Nazis carried out their brutal genocide against the Jewish people. In the eyes of many, the Vatican's silence during this dark period equated to complicity, prompting the question, why did the Pope not publicly denounce Hitler's atrocities? However, recently uncovered documents have begun to offer a different perspective. A list of 3,200 Jewish individuals who once lived in Rome was discovered within the archives of the Pontifical Biblical Institute. These documents indicate that these individuals were hidden in monasteries, convents, and other Catholic institutions within the city after Nazi forces occupied Rome in the year 1943. The list has been verified by Rome's Jewish community, with support from Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Israel, and several Catholic universities. The evidence suggests that when Jews were expelled from the Roman ghetto, many were sheltered within religious institutions at the very heart of the capital, rather than deported to concentration camps. This may be the clearest evidence yet that the Vatican offered help quietly behind the scenes. Still, not everyone sees this as an act of pure compassion. Some researchers argue that many religious institutions only offered shelter on the condition that Jews convert to Catholicism. This raises a troubling question. Was the Vatican acting out of mercy, or was it seizing a moment of chaos to further religious conversion? Some argue that Pope Pius XII chose to act in silence to avoid Nazi retaliation, believing that an open condemnation of Hitler could have led to even more devastating consequences for Catholics across Europe. Others remain unconvinced, asserting that silence in the face of evil, regardless of reasoning, cannot be justified. To this day, the Vatican's true role during the Holocaust remains an unsolved puzzle. The newly revealed documents shed light on one part of the story, but also raise difficult questions. Was the Vatican a bystander, a silent hero, or simply an institution trying to navigate between power and morality? This remains one of the most complex and sensitive chapters in the long and troubled intersection between religion and war. The Ark of the Covenant. Throughout religious history, the Ark of the Covenant has been regarded as one of the most sacred and powerful objects ever crafted. According to the Bible, it was the wooden chest used by the ancient Israelites to house the stone tablets bearing the Ten Commandments. The ark was said to be made of acacia wood, overlaid with pure gold both inside and out, and topped with 2 golden angels whose wings stretched over the lid. During the Israelites' long journey through the wilderness, the ark was not only a religious symbol, but was believed to carry the very presence of God, capable of bestowing blessings or unleashing divine wrath. However, around the year 587 BC, when Babylonian forces invaded Jerusalem and destroyed the first temple, the Ark of the Covenant abruptly vanished from all official records. Since then, its fate has become one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in religious history. Some scholars believe the Ark was destroyed in the invasion, while others insist it was hidden away and safeguarded before the enemy arrived. Among the more provocative theories, there are those who suggest that the Ark may now lie deep within the Vatican's vaults. Why is the Vatican often drawn into this mystery? One main reason lies in the uncanny similarities between the Ark of the Covenant and sacred chests found in ancient Egyptian religious rituals. Egyptian ceremonial boxes, especially those used in processions of the gods, were also crafted from wood, coated in gold, equipped with side handles, and often adorned with divine beings like Anubis or winged creatures. Researchers like Scott Breyer have noted that in Pharaoh Tutankhamun's tomb, archaeologists discovered a ritual chest closely matching the biblical description of the ark. Could it be that the ancient Israelites borrowed the concept from Egyptian culture, or was there a deeper spiritual connection between these two great civilizations? If any modern organization has the power, resources, and secrecy to preserve such a sacred artifact for thousands of years, it would be the Vatican. Of course, the Vatican has never confirmed nor denied possessing the Ark of the Covenant, but silence, as so often happens, only fuels the mystery. Many believe that if the Ark still exists, it is being kept in a place of unparalleled security. The fake mummy scandal at the Vatican The Vatican Museums house one of the largest collections of ancient artifacts in the world, featuring treasures from Roman sculptures and ancient manuscripts to Egyptian relics thousands of years old. Among the most notable displays are the Egyptian mummies exhibited in the section dedicated to the Nile civilization. However, a recent discovery has cast doubt on the authenticity of some of these sacred relics. At least a few of the mummies at the Vatican may, in fact, be fakes. The story began in the year 2015, when researchers conducted X-rays and CT scans on 9 mummies exhibited at the Vatican Museums, a routine part of a scheduled preservation assessment. The images revealed something unexpected. 2 of the mummies did not contain the remains of children or animals as previously labeled. Instead, wrapped tightly in linen were the bones of 2 adults, a man and a woman, dating not to ancient Egypt, but to the Middle Ages, sometime between the year 14th and the year 15th centuries. In one case, researchers even found a rusted nail from the year 19th century lodged between the bones and wrappings, seemingly placed there to hold the structure together. These were not authentic Egyptian mummies. They were the year 19th century fabrications, products of an era known as mummy mania that swept Europe and America. During this period, owning an Egyptian mummy became a status symbol, with demand outstripping supply, thus creating a market for fake mummies. Antique dealers began wrapping the bones of more recent human remains in old linen, sometimes repurposing fabric from damaged real mummies, and selling them as ancient Egyptian artifacts. These counterfeit relics found their way into museums and research institutions globally, remaining undetected for decades. The Vatican was no exception. The revelation that fake mummies had been on display in the Holy See's most revered museum surprised the public and raised troubling questions about the authenticity of other historic relics. If forgeries can infiltrate such a sacred and prestigious place, what might be happening in museums elsewhere? Yet, it's important to recognize that the Vatican did not deliberately deceive the public. In the year 19th century, artifact authenticity was largely based on appearance, as technologies like X-rays or carbon dating did not exist. Acquisitions were made based on trust and the perceived credibility of the seller. The scandal highlights the challenges of authenticating ancient artifacts and the evolving nature of archaeological science. The Altar of Moses. According to the Bible, after leading the Israelites out of Egypt, Moses ascended Mount Sinai to receive God's laws. But before he went up the mountain, he performed a specific ritual. At the foot of Sinai, Moses built an altar using uncut stones and erected 12 stone pillars, each representing one of the 12 tribes of Israel. He then offered animal sacrifices, sprinkled the altar with blood, and even cast some upon the people, sealing a sacred covenant between them and God. To many, this episode is a powerful part of Scripture, but to others, it has long been viewed as symbolic, a religious myth without archaeological evidence. Until recently, at Jabal al-Lawz, a mountain in northwestern Saudi Arabia, a group of independent researchers uncovered a curious L-shaped stone structure. The structure was made entirely from rough, unworked stones, lacking steps, constructed platforms, or signs of modern building techniques. In nearly every detail, it resembled the altar described in the Book of Exodus, the very one Moses was said to have built. Nearby, they discovered 12 round stone pillars, each about 23 inches in diameter, neatly arranged close to the altar, leading many to believe they could represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Inside the altar area, researchers found layers of ash, animal bones, and traces of partially burned organic material. Preliminary analysis suggested these remains could be remnants of ritual sacrifices, strikingly similar to offerings detailed in biblical accounts. Despite the attention this discovery has received, the Saudi Arabian government has rejected any connection to biblical events. They maintain that the area once belonged to the Nabateans, an ancient civilization known for their mining operations and stonework. According to the official narrative, the pillars are simply remnants of an old quarry, and the bones could be from domestic activity or cooking by Nabatean workers. Yet, many Western researchers strongly disagree, arguing that the location, layout, building materials, and especially the number of stone pillars are too specific to be mere coincidence. Some have even suggested that Jabal al-Lawz may, in fact, be the true Mount Sinai, not the traditionally accepted site in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. If the altar at Jabal al-Lawz truly is the one Moses built, this could be one of the clearest archaeological confirmations of a biblical event ever found. Of course, no major archaeological institution has yet officially endorsed the discovery, and the site remains difficult to access due to political restrictions. Still, for many, the evidence already uncovered is enough to reignite belief. The fallen popes. To many, becoming pope seems like the pinnacle of sacred authority, a position both holy and untouchable. But history tells a far more dangerous story. Of the 266 men who have sat on the papal throne, at least 42 have died under mysterious or unusual circumstances. Some were executed, others poisoned, and a few perished in bizarre accidents. These deaths are a stark reminder that no matter how divine the office may appear, power has always come with a price, especially in a world shaped by politics, betrayal, and revenge. One of the strangest tales in the Church's history is that of Pope Formosus. He died in the year 896, and one might have expected that to be the end of his story. But not long after, his successor, Pope Stephen VI, ordered Formosus's body exhumed, dressed it again in papal vestments, and placed it on trial in a bizarre proceeding known as the Cadaver Synod. The corpse was declared guilty. 3 fingers, those believed to have blessed the faithful, were cut off, and the body was thrown into the Tiber River. The episode is so grotesque that historians still debate its motivations and the depth of internal hatred within the medieval Vatican. Alongside these macabre deaths were popes who led lives of decadence and scandal, tarnishing the Church's image. Sixtus IV, who reigned from the year 1471 to the year 1484, was infamous for appointing relatives to powerful church positions, and was rumored to have fathered several illegitimate children. Alexander VI, better known as Pope Rodrigo Borgia, remains one of the most controversial figures in papal history. He held lavish feasts inside the Vatican, maintained multiple mistresses, and used his position to elevate his family's influence. Then there was John XII, who ascended to the papacy around the year 18 years old and was said to have turned the Vatican into a house of debauchery. He died while committing adultery with a nobleman's wife. Some say he was beaten to death by her husband. Others claim he suffered a stroke during the act. Other popes met more unexpected fates. John XXI, a pope interested in medicine and science, died when the ceiling of his study collapsed on him while he was working, surviving a few days before succumbing to his injuries. Urban VI reportedly fell off a mule and died from the accident. His death was not mysterious, but it remains one of the least dignified ends for a man once regarded as the supreme leader of the Church. These stories reveal that the papal throne is not only a symbol of divine authority, it has also been, at times, a seat of political intrigue, personal tragedy, and human vulnerability. The highest office in the Church has come at a steep cost for some, and while the Pope is called the Vicar of Christ on earth, history reminds us that many popes, despite their titles, were still men driven by ambition and often undone by it. The debauchery of the Borgia popes. In the 15th and the year 16th centuries, the Vatican fell under the influence of one of the most controversial families in Catholic Church history, the Borgia dynasty. Originally from Spain, the Borgias quickly consolidated power in Italy through political cunning, financial maneuvering, and personal alliances. Though only 2 popes emerged from the Borgia line, their impact on the Vatican during that era was immense. The first was Pope Calixtus III, born Alonso de Borja. He ascended to the papacy in the year 1455 at an advanced age and reigned for just 3 years before his death. During that brief tenure, he made several notable decisions, including the posthumous rehabilitation of Joan of Arc, the French heroine who had been condemned as a heretic and burned at the stake in the year 1431. Calixtus III also ensured the elevation of his relatives, appointing several family members as cardinals to safeguard Borgia influence after his death. His successor within the family was his nephew Rodrigo Borgia, later known as Pope Alexander VI. Rodrigo had already attracted scandal long before he wore the papal crown. He fathered numerous illegitimate children and lived an openly lavish lifestyle. Despite this, he was elected pope in the year 1492. Upon becoming pontiff, Alexander VI ushered in a reign defined by corruption, excess, and decadence. He was accused of selling church offices, where those with wealth were made cardinals regardless of virtue or piety. One of the most infamous episodes of his papacy was the banquet held on the 31st of October, the year 1501, known as the Banquet of Chestnuts. This event took place inside the Papal Palace in Rome and was attended by high-ranking clergy and approximately 50 prostitutes brought in to entertain the guests. Eyewitnesses described a night of unchecked indulgence, overflowing with wine, lust, and conduct unimaginable in what was meant to be the heart of Christian faith. The moral collapse during Alexander VI's reign deeply tarnished the Vatican's reputation. Though he died of malaria in the year 1503, what he left behind became a permanent stain on church history. The Borgia family not only weakened the spiritual trust of the faithful, but marked an era where religious power was manipulated for personal gain, compromise, and depravity. To this day, the name Borgia remains a symbol of one of the darkest chapters in the Vatican's past. The Vatican Gifts, a relic of the true cross. In May the year 2023, as King Charles III walked into Westminster Abbey for his coronation, he followed behind a very special cross. This was no ordinary Christian symbol. According to an official statement from the Vatican, it contained 2 fragments of the true cross, the very cross upon which Jesus Christ was crucified. The gift was personally bestowed by Pope Francis to the United Kingdom as a symbol of faith and unity between 2 nations. But the sacred gift quickly stirred questions that remain unanswered. How could the Vatican possibly possess so many fragments of the true cross that it could afford to give them away like relics of goodwill? And if this was truly a part of the original cross, how could such a claim ever be verified? According to tradition, the true cross was discovered in the year 4th century AD by Helena, the mother of Roman Emperor Constantine. During her pilgrimage to Jerusalem, she reportedly unearthed 3 wooden crosses, one of which was believed to be the instrument of Christ's crucifixion. Over centuries, the relic was broken into smaller and smaller pieces, distributed among Europe's great churches. With time, the number of alleged fragments multiplied so dramatically that some have joked, if you gathered them all in one place, you could build an entire ship. Not everyone accepts the authenticity of these sacred splinters. In the year 2016, researchers at Oxford University tested a piece of the true cross kept at Waterford Cathedral in Ireland. Their findings dated the wood to the year 12th century, over 100 years after Jesus' time. Still, that hasn't stopped churches worldwide from venerating these relics. One lesser-known episode occurred in the year 2022 during the height of the war between Russia and Ukraine. According to a Russian Orthodox priest, a piece of the true cross was placed aboard the guided missile cruiser Moskva, the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. When the ship was struck by Ukrainian missiles and sank, the relic went down with it. No one knows whether it was a genuine piece of the original cross, but the story adds to the mystery surrounding these venerated fragments. Whatever the truth, the fact that the Vatican still possesses and gifts wooden pieces believed to be the most sacred object in all of Christianity raises important questions. Is this truly a meaningful act of faith? Or is it part of a long-standing tradition of religious symbolism passed down through centuries? The Vatican and the American Civil War. During the American Civil War, there was an event rarely mentioned in history textbooks, yet it caused a diplomatic shockwave at the time. Pope Pius IX recognized Jefferson Davis as the President of the Confederate States of America. This move outraged the U.S. government and cast a long shadow over relations for more than a century. It began in the year 1863, when President Jefferson Davis, the leader of the Southern Confederacy, wrote a letter to Pope Pius IX, expressing gratitude for the Pope's prayers for peace. What stunned many was the Vatican's reply. In his response, Pope Pius IX referred to Jefferson Davis as President of the Confederate States of America, a form of address that carried clear political implications. Though the Vatican never issued a formal declaration recognizing the South as an independent nation, the language used was widely interpreted as a quiet endorsement of the secessionist cause. The reaction from the United States was severe. Under President Abraham Lincoln, the federal government saw the Pope's words as an unacceptable foreign intrusion into domestic affairs. That a major religious power like the Vatican appeared to side with a faction defending slavery only deepened national divisions. In the years that followed, diplomatic relations between the U.S. and the Holy See grew increasingly strained. By the year 1867, Congress passed a law cutting off all official ties with the Vatican, a break that would remain in effect until the year 1980s. But the story didn't end there. After the war concluded and Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, rumors began to swirl that the Pope's support for the Confederacy might have indirectly encouraged extremist actions. Some historians have noted that several individuals involved in the assassination plot were Catholic, speculating that Pope Pius IX's position could have influenced their thinking. While no official evidence has ever linked the Vatican to Lincoln's murder, the mere suggestion has left an enduring shadow. Adding to the mystery are several lesser-known details. After the war, when Jefferson Davis was imprisoned, Pope Pius IX sent him a portrait of himself, along with a written prayer. According to some accounts, the Pope also gifted Davis a crown of thorns, a symbol of Christ's suffering. Though this latter claim has never been officially confirmed, the gesture of sending any gift at all was enough to show that the Vatican had not turned its back on the defeated leader of the South. To many, this episode serves as evidence that the Vatican once stood on the wrong side of history, not just in the American Civil War, but in other politically sensitive moments around the world. Whether that judgment is fair or not, the incident left a long, uneasy silence between a modern superpower and one of the oldest religious institutions on Earth. The treasure of King Solomon. In the Bible, King Solomon is portrayed as one of the most powerful and wealthy rulers to have ever lived. He was the son of King David and reigned over the kingdom of Israel around the year 10th century BCE. But what people remember most about Solomon is not just his wisdom, it is his seemingly unimaginable wealth. Some modern estimates suggest that, converted into today's value, Solomon's fortune could have exceeded $2. 1 trillion, far beyond any modern billionaire. According to the Bible, each year Solomon received vast quantities of gold, silver, ivory, and precious goods from other nations. He used this immense wealth to build the first temple in Jerusalem, a sacred site said to have once housed the Ark of the Covenant, considered one of the most magnificent religious structures of the ancient world. Yet for centuries, archaeological evidence has remained elusive, insufficient to fully confirm these descriptions as historical fact. Some scholars have argued that the Bible exaggerated Solomon's power and riches. But in recent years, new archaeological discoveries have reignited the question: could Solomon have truly been an ancient merchant king? One of the leading theories is that Solomon established long-standing trade relations with the Phoenicians, an ancient seafaring civilization known for their expansive commerce across the Mediterranean. According to some researchers, Solomon financed maritime expeditions that ventured across distant seas to gather minerals and valuable goods. Marine archaeologist Dr. Shaw Kingsley believes these trade links were real. After years of research, he and his team have uncovered traces of ancient activity at coastal ports in Israel, Spain, and even Sardinia, places once connected to Phoenician trading networks. At the same time, another group of researchers has focused inland, specifically the Negev Desert in southern Israel. There, archaeologists have uncovered large-scale copper mines dating roughly to the era in which Solomon is believed to have ruled. Given the vast quantities of copper extracted from the region, some experts now believe these operations may have played a critical role in the economy of Solomon's kingdom. In the ancient world, copper was not just a valuable metal. It was essential for making tools, weapons, and decorative objects. If these mines truly date to Solomon's reign, they could point to a historical basis for the wealth described in the Bible. And if Solomon indeed pioneered both maritime trade routes and resource extraction on land, then he was not merely a figure of myth. He may have been one of the earliest commercial monarchs in human history. To this day, the actual treasure of Solomon has never been found, but the evidence is beginning to surface slowly, piece by piece. Saint Christopher and the god Anubis. In Christian tradition, Saint Christopher is known as the patron saint of travelers, drivers, and pilgrims. But there is a detail often overlooked, yet widely debated. In certain medieval artworks, Saint Christopher is depicted with the body of a man, but the head of a dog. This puzzling portrayal has led many to ask, why would a saint appear in such a strange form? What makes the mystery even more intriguing is that Saint Taliu.o. Christopher's dog-headed appearance bears a striking resemblance to the Egyptian god Anubis. Anubis, the guardian of the dead and master of embalming rituals, was typically portrayed as a human figure with the head of a jackal. He was charged with protecting souls and preserving the purity of the afterlife. The visual similarity has inspired a number of theories. One suggests it may have stemmed from a mistranslation in the distant past. If a single word was copied incorrectly in an early manuscript, it could have transformed the image of Christopher from an ordinary man into a dog-headed being in both artistic imagination and painted form. A second theory is rooted in ancient European legend. Roman and medieval texts describe distant tribes said to dwell on the fringes of the known world, people with human bodies and the heads of dogs, known as cynocephali or dog-headed men. In some stories, they were not demons, but simply strange beings living apart from the rest of humanity. Some scholars suggest that Saint Brost of Lübbervox, Christopher may have originally been associated with this mythical group, and that over time, the Church reinterpreted him as a symbol of transformation, an outsider redeemed and sanctified through faith. And then there is the boldest theory of all. What if Saint Christopher was, in essence, a Christianized version of Anubis himself? The similarities in appearance and role are difficult to ignore. During the early centuries of Christianity's spread, the Church often absorbed pagan deities and mythologies, recasting them as saints to ease the transition for new converts. If this was the case, then the dog-headed image of Saint Christopher was not a mistake or misunderstanding, but a lingering echo of an older, deeper cultural layer. Today, most modern depictions of Saint Christopher show him as a strong man carrying the child Jesus across a river. But in the past, dog-headed versions of the saint could still be found in churches, illuminated manuscripts, and murals, especially throughout medieval Europe. The incorrupt nun. In the year 2019, at a small monastery in the state of Missouri, Sister Wilhelmina Lancaster passed away at the age of 95. She was the founder of the Benedictine Sisters of Mary, a traditional religious community known for its strict adherence to discipline, prayer, and faith. After her death, her body was laid to rest in a simple wooden coffin. It was not embalmed, no preservatives were used, and there was no refrigeration system. Everything was carried out modestly, in keeping with the humble life she had lived. 4 years later, in May the year 2023, the sisters at the monastery decided to relocate her remains into the chapel on the monastery grounds. When they opened the coffin, they were stunned. Wilhelmina Lancaster's body was mysteriously intact. Her skin retained its elasticity, her face showed no signs of distortion, and even her clothing remained unspoiled. Those present could hardly believe their eyes. Under natural conditions, with high humidity and a cracked coffin, the body should have fully decomposed. Yet, what lay before them was a body that appeared almost unchanged after 4 years underground. News of the phenomenon spread quickly, and thousands of people traveled to the monastery to witness the scene and pray beside her remains. Many believed it was a true miracle, a sign of holiness in Sister Wilhelmina Lancaster's life. Some faithful even began referring to her as America's first incorrupt nun, a term used in Catholic tradition to describe individuals whose bodies do not decay after death, believed by some to be a mark of divine favor. However, the Vatican has not yet recognized this as a miracle, nor has it made any official move to consider Wilhelmina for sainthood. Many hope an investigation will begin soon, but for now, everything remains under review. Meanwhile, some scientists have offered more grounded explanations, and Dr. Nicholas Pasalacqua, a forensic expert, noted that the human body can take up to 5 years or more to decompose depending on environmental conditions, humidity, and microbial activity. While he acknowledged the unusual state of preservation, he maintained there may still be a scientific explanation. Even so, the extraordinary preservation of Wilhelmina Lancaster's body left a powerful impression on those who saw it. For many, especially devout Catholics, it was more than coincidence. It was a sign of faith made visible. Today, Sister Wilhelmina's body rests in a glass coffin inside the monastery's chapel, where the public continues to visit and pay their respects. Whether it is a miracle or a natural phenomenon, her story has stirred both renewed belief and questions that remain unanswered. Mafia, the Vatican Bank, and Archbishop Paul Marcinkus in the year 1970s and the year 1980s. The Vatican was not only the spiritual center of the Catholic world, it also became the epicenter of one of the biggest financial scandals of the century. At the heart of the storm was a man named Paul Marcinkus, an American archbishop who ran the Vatican Bank for nearly 2 decades. Marcinkus was once a trusted figure within the church. He led the Istituto per le Opere di Religione, Institute for Works of Religion, better known as the Vatican Bank, from the year 1971 to the year 1989. But under his leadership, the bank didn't just process religious transactions. It became entangled in a web of complex financial operations, including money laundering and shady investments. Suspicions of ties between the Vatican Bank and the Italian mafia began to emerge when investigators uncovered large sums of money funneled through shell companies and untraceable offshore accounts. The scandal reached its peak in the early 1980s when the Vatican Bank was implicated in the collapse of Banco Ambrosiano, then one of Italy's largest private financial institutions. The Vatican, a minority shareholder in Ambrosiano, was accused of backing secret loans totaling over $1.3 billion through phantom corporations allegedly linked to both Marcinkus and figures from the criminal underworld. As law enforcement and financial authorities expanded their investigation, they sought to question Marcinkus, but the Vatican refused to cooperate, citing diplomatic immunity for high-ranking officials. As a Vatican citizen and a member of the Holy See's governing body, Paul Marcinkus could not be prosecuted under Italian law. Even when U.S. authorities expressed interest in investigating suspicious transactions tied to international markets, Marcinkus never appeared in court. For the remainder of his life, Paul Marcinkus lived quietly in a small town in Arizona. He rarely spoke publicly about the scandal, and until his death in the year 2006, he was never formally charged with any crime. Yet his name remains forever linked to one of the darkest chapters in the financial history of the Vatican. The story of Marcinkus is not just about a financial scandal. It is a stark reminder that even within the walls of a sacred religious institution, hidden doors may conceal dangerous alliances and truths too uncomfortable to face. King David, legend or history? In the Bible, King David is one of the most frequently mentioned figures, the young shepherd who defeated Goliath, the successor to King Saul, and the ruler said to have governed a powerful kingdom with its capital in Jerusalem. But did David truly exist? And if he did, was he really the leader of a great empire as described in Scripture? For centuries, the absence of clear archaeological evidence led many to doubt that King David was anything more than a legendary figure invented to legitimize a later ruling dynasty. But a critical discovery in the year 1993 began to shift that perception. At an archaeological site in northern Israel known as Tel Dan, researchers uncovered a stone fragment inscribed with the phrase, "House of David." This was the first and most important extra-biblical reference to David, a confirmation not from within the Hebrew tradition, but from an enemy's records. A victorious Aramean king had engraved on his victory stele that he had defeated the king of Israel and the king of the house of David. This find marked a turning point in biblical archaeology. Though the stone fragment was small, it proved that the name David had real historical presence in the ancient Near East. It was not simply a literary invention. Since then, other excavations have been launched to investigate the true scale of David's kingdom. One of the leading figures in this research is Professor Yosef Garfinkel of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Over many years, he and his team uncovered a network of fortified cities surrounding the region of Judah, all dating to the same era, the year 10th century BCE, precisely the time when David is believed to have reigned. According to Professor Garfinkel, if these cities were built simultaneously, shared similar structures, and were linked by an organized road system, then it is likely they were part of a centralized government. And if that were the case, the man who led that kingdom would have been none other than King David. However, not everyone agrees with this conclusion. Some scholars argue that the cities are still too small to suggest an empire. They believe David may have been a local tribal chieftain ruling over a modest area around Jerusalem, and that his grandeur was embellished by later biblical editors. While the debate remains unsettled, recent archaeological findings have increasingly pointed to the likelihood that King David was not just a figure of myth. He was a real person, possibly one with far more power and historical significance than the academic world had once imagined. The Vatican's role in the Rwanda genocide. In the year 1994, the African nation of Rwanda descended into a period of unimaginable bloodshed. Within just 3 months, an estimated 800,000 people, mostly from the Tutsi ethnic group, were brutally killed in what the world would later call genocide. What makes this tragedy even more unsettling is the special role the Catholic Church played during that time. With a vast number of followers and deep-rooted influence in local communities, the Church was an integral part of Rwanda's social and spiritual life. But instead of serving as sanctuaries, some Catholic churches in Rwanda became the sites of the most horrific massacres. Many civilians fled to churches seeking protection, believing these were sacred places and that priests would help shield them from the violence. But not everyone was saved. Some priests were accused not only of indifference, but of directly contributing to the deaths of thousands. One of the most cited cases was that of Father Athanase Saromba, the priest in charge of a church where around 2,000 Tutsis had sought refuge. According to witness testimony and official investigations, Saromba allowed the entire church to be destroyed while the people were still inside. He was later arrested and tried by the International Criminal Tribunal for crimes against humanity. But the story didn't end there. When the Rwandan government requested the extradition of other priests believed to be involved in the genocide, the Vatican refused. Instead, several of these individuals were relocated to other countries in Europe, given new identities, and allowed to continue their religious duties as if nothing had happened. The Vatican's refusal to extradite these priests left many baffled. For a religious institution with global moral influence, the decision created a silence that remains difficult to explain. Some argue it was an effort to protect the church's reputation, while others believe it was an attempt to avoid public shame. Whatever the reason, it left a deep wound not only in the hearts of many Rwandans, but also in those around the world who care about justice. This issue is not just about individual guilt or isolated trials. It raises a larger question of moral responsibility. What does it mean when a global religious institution chooses not to speak out or take action in the face of such overwhelming tragedy? The Vatican and the ivory trade. For years, the world has witnessed the alarming decline of the African elephant population. These gentle giants are often killed for one reason alone: the valuable ivory that grows from their heads. It is a tragic reality not just for conservationists, but for anyone who cares about the survival of life on Earth. What many find surprising is the role of the Vatican in this story. Not because the Church is directly involved in elephant hunting, but because ivory has long been used in the creation of religious objects, crucifixes, saintly statues, and various decorations found in churches. These items appear during sacred rituals in holy spaces and sometimes even in religious souvenir shops. While many countries and international organizations have signed agreements to protect endangered species, the Vatican has not joined CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, established in the year 1989 to curb the trade in ivory and other products from threatened animals. By not participating, the Vatican is under no obligation to follow the same restrictions on ivory use and sale that apply to other nations. Animal rights advocates have repeatedly urged the Vatican to abandon the use of ivory in religious artifacts and to seek alternative materials. They argue that an institution that preaches compassion and the sanctity of life should lead by example, especially when the objects in question are themselves symbols of sacred meaning. Yet, to this day, the Vatican has made no clear move to end its use of ivory, nor has it issued any public statement on the matter. The tradition of crafting religious icons and ceremonial objects from ivory continues in certain countries with workshops that have long-standing ties to the Church. While many communities worldwide are striving to change in order to preserve the natural balance of life, the silence from an institution as globally influential as the Vatican has sparked considerable debate. This raises fundamental questions about the Church's practical application of its moral teachings in a modern world facing ecological crises. Age of consent in Vatican City. Before the year 2013, the Vatican upheld a legal standard that many found difficult to comprehend. The age of consent for sexual relations was set at just 12 years old. This number was highly controversial, not only because it was significantly lower than the modern standard in most countries worldwide, but also because it remained unchanged for decades without amendment or serious debate. With its tiny geographic size and a population made up almost entirely of clergy, Vatican employees, and security personnel, the Holy See is rarely a place where public discourse about legal systems or human rights takes center stage. Yet, in the context of growing revelations surrounding sexual abuse scandals within the Catholic Church, the preservation of such a legal standard raised serious questions about the moral awareness and institutional responsibility of the world's most powerful religious body. The age of consent is defined as the age at which a person can legally engage in sexual activity with informed consent without it being considered statutory abuse. In most developed nations, this age typically ranges from 16 to 18. The fact that the Vatican kept it at 12, even if only as a technicality rarely applied in practice, was troubling to many international observers, especially given the Church's long-standing emphasis on protecting morality, children, and societal purity. It wasn't until the year 2013, after mounting external pressure and a wave of investigations into the abuse of minors by clergy, that Pope Francis signed a new law raising the age of consent to 18. The move was seen as both necessary and appropriate, but for many, it came far too late. This change did not erase what had already occurred, nor could it instantly restore the trust that had been eroded among Catholics worldwide. But at the very least, it marked an acknowledgement that law must reflect not only legal standards, but moral values, human rights, and the duty to protect the most vulnerable. Nazi gold and the Vatican Bank. After World War II, as documents surfaced, testimonies were collected, and long-running investigations unfolded, certain secrets began to emerge. Among them was the troubling claim that the Vatican Bank had been involved in storing and transferring gold looted by the Croatian fascist regime. The story began in the year 1946, when an agent from the U.S. Treasury Department issued an internal memorandum. In it, he alleged that a large quantity of gold had been brought from Europe into the Vatican, not for charitable or religious purposes, but to assist former members of the Ustasha, the fascist regime that ruled Croatia during the war, in escaping prosecution. According to the memo, the gold had been stolen from Jews, Serbs, Romani, and other minority communities during the Ustasha's reign of terror. A portion of it was allegedly transferred to the Vatican Bank and then used to fund escape routes leading to South America or Spain, places where many former fascists would live out their lives without ever facing justice. Years later, in the year 1997, the Gowan Memorandum resurfaced, this time in the context of a class action lawsuit filed in the United States by victims and their descendants. They demanded the return of property taken from their families during the war and alleged the Vatican's involvement in its concealment. But the case went nowhere. The court dismissed it, citing the Vatican's immunity from civil lawsuits in the United States. This remains a difficult topic, raising questions not only about history but about ethics. If the allegations are true, then the Vatican may have been complicit in the silent movement of stolen assets during one of the darkest chapters in human history. To this day, the Vatican has not formally acknowledged any responsibility related to the gold, and the full records surrounding the matter remain unreleased. But for many, the issue is not about receiving an apology, it's about transparency, about understanding what truly happened and finally closing a chapter of history that for far too long has remained unresolved. Prostitution rings and hidden secrets inside the Vatican. In the year 2010, a police arrest in Italy unexpectedly exposed a web of highly sensitive connections. Angelo Balducci, a man with long-standing ties to the Vatican and a former high-ranking official in the Italian government, was arrested for his involvement in a male prostitution ring that reportedly served senior members of the clergy. Police investigations revealed that the network had been operating covertly for an extended period and included individuals who had once been trusted by the Vatican. The scandal quickly escalated, not only because of its explicit nature, but because it directly struck at the public image of the Catholic Church. Wiretapped phone calls were made public, exposing conversations that detailed a level of organization and entanglement far more intricate than the public had ever imagined. Then, in the year 2013, an internal report commissioned by the Vatican reignited a storm of suspicion and controversy. The report, believed to be the result of a confidential investigation within the Church, alleged that a number of cardinals and high-ranking officials had engaged in same-sex relationships and had been blackmailed by those who knew their secrets. The documents were never officially released, but multiple sources have claimed that the findings contributed to the shocking resignation of Pope Benedict XVI later that same year, rare occurrence in the modern history of the Church. Although the Vatican has never publicly confirmed these reports. Such revelations are no longer unfamiliar. Many inside and outside the church have expressed concern not only over individual misconduct, but over the vulnerability of a global institution to internal compromise. This is not merely a story of personal morality. It raises deeper questions about transparency and the church's ability to police itself, a church that holds spiritual authority over millions of lives. No matter how difficult the truth may be to face, trust can only endure when it is built on honesty. The Vatican and its quiet ties to the Italian mafia. For decades, the church maintained silence regarding the existence and influence of mafia groups, at times even refusing to acknowledge that these criminal organizations existed at all. In the year 1964, a high-ranking cardinal declared that the mafia is merely a product of the imagination of those who oppose the church. The statement was not only shocking, but revealed a kind of evasiveness that many believed to be intentional. Later evidence, however, showed that the relationship between certain church members and mafia groups was not merely one of denial. In some cases, mafia organizations were found to have financed religious activities, donated money to build churches, or provided financial support for major local church events. These contributions were often accepted under the label of benevolent donors, with little scrutiny over the origin of the funds. One of the most controversial examples occurred in the year 2000s, when a notorious mafia boss was buried inside a major church in Sicily, just steps away from where popes are traditionally laid to rest. His funeral was conducted with full religious honors, led by a priest and attended by hundreds of mourners. While there is no evidence that the Vatican directly authorized the event, the fact that such a ceremony was allowed to take place within the sacred walls of the church left many bewildered. In recent years, some popes, most notably Pope Francis, have spoken out more forcefully against the violence and corruption perpetuated by criminal organizations. Yet, the past remains, and the quiet relationships that once existed have never been fully explained. The historical entanglement of a spiritual institution with organized crime continues to be a point of discomfort and unresolved inquiry. Vatileaks. When the Vatican's secrets were exposed. At the center of the Vatileaks scandal, where the Vatican's secrets were exposed, was none other than Paolo Gabriele, the personal butler to Pope Benedict XVI. Gabriele was not a high-ranking official, nor was he an outsider. He lived inside Vatican City, worked beside the Pope daily, and had access to some of the most sensitive documents within the Holy See. For months, Gabriele secretly photocopied internal documents, ranging from letters and financial reports to personal notes exchanged between bishops and senior church officials. These materials were later passed to an Italian journalist and published in a bombshell book that revealed stories the Vatican never intended for the public eye. The leaked documents painted a picture far removed from the Vatican's polished public image: power struggles behind closed doors, financial scandals, mismanagement within key departments, and internal complaints about Pope Benedict's leadership. The revelations didn't just shake the faith of many Catholics, they triggered widespread doubts about the Church's true level of transparency. Once the leak was discovered, Gabriele was arrested and charged with theft of confidential documents. He admitted to his actions but claimed he was motivated by a desire to open the Pope's eyes to what was happening around him, believing that internal forces were deliberately keeping the truth from Benedict. Gabriele never took money for his actions and made no attempt to flee. After a formal trial, he was convicted, but Pope Benedict later pardoned him. Though Gabriele was the only individual officially brought to justice, many believe he did not act alone. Strong suspicions exist of a wider group of clergy and Vatican insiders who, disillusioned by internal governance, may have used Gabriele as a conduit to leak the truth. The Vatileaks scandal left a lasting impact, proving that even within the most sacred and secretive institutions, human conflict, discontent, and power struggles persist, just as they do everywhere else. The Secret Files of Canon 489. Canon 489 is not a myth or rumor. It is a real archive, an official collection of documents preserved with utmost secrecy from the year 18th century to the present day. Within it are detailed records of serious incidents involving crimes, misconduct, and the ways the Church chose to handle them. These files contain not only confessions from priests, but also internal correspondence, diocesan reports, and high-level directives ordering matters to be handled internally or sensitive documents to be destroyed. For generations, these records were meticulously kept but hidden from the public, the press, and even external legal authorities. It wasn't until the year 2002, when the child abuse scandal within the Boston Archdiocese exploded, that a portion of the truth began to surface. A U.S. court forced the local church to release relevant documents, and part of what resembled the contents of Canon 489 came to light. What people saw was a long chain of cover-ups, priests quietly reassigned, victims told to remain silent, and letters from high-ranking officials confirming that misconduct was known but never made public. Still, the majority of the Canon 489 files have never been disclosed. Only a select few individuals within the Vatican have access, and those who have worked near the archive are bound by strict oaths of absolute secrecy. What troubles many is not just the fact that such wrongdoing occurred, but that it was so carefully documented, yet deliberately kept in the dark. If the Church truly seeks purity and moral accountability, then what is the reason for holding on so tightly to these files? This raises profound ethical questions about institutional transparency versus self-preservation. Father Walter Ciszek, a Jesuit spy who passed through the shadows of the Soviet Union. Walter Ciszek was born in the year 1904 in the town of Shenandoah, Pennsylvania. His family were Polish immigrants living in a tight-knit Catholic community. From a young age, Ciszek felt a deep calling to become a priest. In the year 1928, he officially joined the Jesuit order, and by the year 1937, he was ordained. At that time, the world stood on the brink of war. When World War II broke out, Ciszek believed he had a mission to bring the Catholic faith to the Soviet Union, a place where religion was being violently suppressed by the state. Determined, he studied the Russian language and disguised himself as an ordinary laborer, using forged documents to cross the border into the USSR in secret. His goal was to serve as a priest in silence, spreading faith behind enemy lines. But just a few years later, in the year 1941, he was arrested by Soviet security forces, who accused him of being a Vatican spy. Ciszek was taken to the infamous Lubyanka prison in Moscow, known for its brutal interrogations and drawn-out investigations. He was held there for 5 years, most of it in solitary confinement, uncertain whether he would live or die. Yet, despite everything, he held firmly to his faith, praying daily, even in the darkness. Eventually, he was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor in Siberia. The conditions in the labor camps were so harsh that many did not survive a single winter. But Father Ciszek did more than survive. He found ways to continue his priestly mission, hearing confessions, offering comfort, and organizing secret prayer services for other prisoners even as he endured hunger, cold, and exhaustion himself. In the year 1955, his sentence was reduced for exceeding labor quotas. However, he was not released. Instead, he was forced to live in a remote industrial town, working in a chemical plant. His family in the United States had no idea he was still alive, having long believed him dead. Then, in the early year 1960s, they unexpectedly received a letter from him. With the intervention of President John F. Kennedy, a prisoner exchange was arranged in the year 1963. Walter Ciszek was finally freed after spending 23 years behind the Iron Curtain, returning to the United States to the astonishment and admiration of many. Despite living under constant danger and being treated as an enemy of the state, Father Ciszek harbored no bitterness. Instead, he chose a quiet life, continuing to teach and write. His 2 memoirs, With God in Russia and He Leadeth Me, do more than recount the story of a man imprisoned and exiled. They offer a profound reflection on faith, endurance, and sacrifice in the face of unimaginable trials. The religion of Homo erectus. If we travel back hundreds of thousands of years to a time before writing, before structured language, and before organized society, one might ask, did religion already exist? Some researchers believe the answer could very well be yes. Homo erectus was an early human species that lived roughly 1.5 to 2 million years ago. They knew how to use tools, mastered fire, and walked upright. These abilities suggest they did not merely act on instinct, but had begun to develop a sense of structure and community. And once humans started living in groups, sharing food, and building relationships, it's entirely possible they also began to form primitive systems of belief. Though Homo erectus left behind no scriptures or temples, certain archaeological discoveries have led scientists to reconsider what they thought they knew. For example, in Indonesia, archaeologists have unearthed skulls with openings cut into the crown. These were not the result of natural forces. They may have been part of a ritual or a sign of reverence for the dead. Some even speculate that it could have been a spiritual form of cannibalism, not merely for survival, but to fulfill a religious or symbolic purpose. In caves throughout parts of Europe, remains of bears have been found arranged in deliberate formations. This once gave rise to the theory that Homo erectus, or other archaic humans, worshipped bears as sacred symbols. Later, some researchers argued that geological shifts might have altered the positioning of the bones. Yet the possibility of a religious ritual was never fully ruled out. Another theory proposes that Homo erectus may have practiced an early form of shamanism, an ancient belief system centered around ritual, herbal medicine, and spiritual experience. Some researchers have suggested that they might have used hallucinogenic mushrooms to communicate with the invisible world. Even today, the use of such substances for spiritual purposes still exists among various indigenous tribes. In addition, objects such as engraved seashells, figurines, or stones marked with traces of red pigment point toward an early human understanding of symbolism and ritual. Though it may not qualify as religion in the way we define it now, it could represent the beginning of a spiritual need that has accompanied humanity since the dawn of consciousness. And if Homo erectus truly did have religion, did they believe in invisible forces? Did they honor the dead? And if their rituals were indeed pagan in nature, then by modern Catholic belief, would they be eligible for salvation? Pope Nicholas V and the origins of the transatlantic slave trade. The histories of religion and politics have at times been so deeply intertwined that it becomes difficult to tell where one ends and the other begins. And occasionally, decisions made in the name of faith have set into motion consequences that would echo for centuries. One such example is the decree issued by Pope Nicholas V in the year 15th Centurion Act that would lay the groundwork for one of the darkest chapters in human history, the transatlantic slave trade. In the mid-1400s, Portugal began expanding its influence into West Africa. At first, Portuguese captains such as Antão Gonçalves were primarily in search of resource enamel hides, oil, and other goods for trade. But everything changed when Gonçalves captured two Berber individuals on the Cap Blanc Peninsula in what is now Mauritania. Upon being brought back to Lisbon, the captives made an unexpected offer. In exchange for their own freedom, they promised to deliver 10 other Africans. And with that proposal, the idea of trading in human lives became a part of commercial practice. At that time, the legality of capturing and selling people was still unclear, especially in the religious context. Medieval laws on the Iberian Peninsula did address the treatment of Muslims, Jews, and certain groups of Christians, but when it came to those considered outside of known religions, the legal framework was all but silent. This is where Pope Nicholas V intervened. In the year 1452 and again in the year 1455, he issued two pivotal papal bulls, Dum Diversus and Romanus Pontifex. In these documents, he officially granted the King of Portugal the right to invade, capture, and subjugate all Saracens, pagans, and other non-believers into perpetual slavery. In other words, if someone did not adhere to Christianity, Portugal was authorized to seize and trade them without it being viewed as a violation of moral or legal standards. This decree set a dangerous precedent. Portugal rapidly expanded its slave raiding operations throughout West Africa. Soon after, other European powers, including Spain, France, England, and the Netherlands, followed suit. Within a few short centuries, millions of Africans were forcibly taken across the Atlantic, sold into plantations across the Americas, and treated not as people, but as property. Ironically, the same papal bull issued by Nicholas V also acknowledged that non-Christians, if converted to Christianity, might be treated differently. Some African kingdoms, such as the Kingdom of Congo, used this clause to negotiate with European powers in hopes of limiting the impact of slave trading on their territories. Looking back, it is clear that the decision of Pope Nicholas V was neither a purely political move nor a purely religious one. It was a historical turning point that helped normalize and legitimize an institution the world now universally condemns as a crime against humanity. The true mystery of St. Sulpice Church. When people think of sacred sites in Paris, most immediately picture the famed Notre Dame Cathedral. However, there is another church, less well-known yet equally steeped in mystery, St. Sulpice. In Dan Brown's novel, The Da Vinci Code, St. Sulpice is portrayed as a critical link in the search for the Holy Grail. Many readers were captivated by the idea that the church concealed coded messages, secret maps, and ancient religious symbols. After the book's release, thousands of tourists flocked to the site, hoping to uncover traces of a hidden mystery carved into stone. But upon closer examination, the truth turns out to be far less fantastical than fiction suggests. One of the most frequently misunderstood elements is the Paris Meridian, a brass line embedded in the church floor, which Dan Brown refers to as the Rose Line. In the novel, it's described as part of a secret map leading to the treasure of the Knights Templar. In reality, it is an astronomical device known as a gnomon, installed in the year 18th century, used to mark the winter solstice and track the passage of time. It has no connection whatsoever to esoteric symbols or secret societies. Another feature often misinterpreted is the painting titled Saint Michael, Defeating the Dragon, which hangs inside the church. In the novel, it's read as a cryptic message from the Knights Templar, allegedly hinting at the downfall of the French monarchy. In truth, it is a standard motif in Catholic art, the Archangel Michael, triumphing over the devil, a depiction of the eternal struggle between good and evil. That said, St. Sulpice remains well worth visiting, not for myths or hidden codes, but for its genuine cultural and historical significance. The church has hosted major ceremonies throughout France's history, and prominent figures like Robespierre and Victor Hugo once walked its corridors. Some of the chapels inside still retain their year 18th century architecture and original artworks, including the Chapel of Our Lady, a space once reserved for the poorest members of the parish. The God Horus and Jesus Christ. For centuries, the life story of Jesus Christ has stood as the cornerstone of Christian faith. Yet, some scholars and researchers argue that this story bears notable similarities to an ancient Egyptian myth, the legend of the god Horus. According to Egyptian tradition, Horus was the son of the goddess Isis. It is said that Isis conceived Horus after the death of her husband Osiris. His birth was portrayed as both miraculous and divine. In certain versions of the myth, he was born in a secluded place, witnessed by shepherds, and protected by the gods. The early years of Horus are sparsely documented, mirroring the gap in the Bible concerning Jesus' life between the ages of 12 and 30. As Horus came of age, he embarked on a battle against evil to restore justice for his slain father. Some accounts suggest that he was accompanied by 12 followers and performed extraordinary acts such as healing the sick, casting out demons, and saving lives. Because of these parallels, many have asked the question, could the story of Jesus have been influenced in part by the myth of Horus? However, serious scholars contend that there is no concrete evidence to support this theory. Many of the details often cited in the comparison were added in later periods and are not found in original Egyptian texts. For instance, no ancient records confirm that Horus had 12 disciples or that he was crucified and resurrected. Furthermore, the concept of baptism did not exist in Egyptian religion in the same sense it does within Christianity. What is evident, however, is that both narratives center around a divine figure with a redemptive mission who suffers and ultimately returns in triumph. The Horus hypothesis remains one of the more intriguing modern comparisons. It does not seek to discredit religious belief, but rather highlights how ancient civilizations may have influenced one another in ways we are only beginning to understand. The Pope's Egyptian Museum, nestled within the heart of the Vatican, lies a lesser-known collection that carries with it layers of complex history. This museum was established in the year 1839 during the papacy of Gregory XVI. Its original purpose was to display ancient Egyptian artifacts, many of which had once been held as personal possessions in the private residence of Pope Pius IV at the Belvedere Palace. The collection here is not only vast but remarkably distinctive. Many of the artifacts date back to the era of ancient Egypt, brought to Europe in the wake of major historical upheavals. particularly following the Battle of Actium in the year 31 BCE. That battle marked the defeat of the alliance between Cleopatra and Mark Antony at the hands of the Roman Empire, resulting in Egypt's loss of independence and its absorption into Rome. After that victory, Romans began transporting a vast array of items from Egypt: statues of deities, ceramic vessels, mummies, and religious relics. Over time, many of these objects ended up in the hands of the popes and were eventually assembled into the museum that visitors can see today. However, the origins of these artifacts have long been a source of controversy. Though they are well preserved and publicly displayed, many scholars and Egyptian citizens view them as war spoil objects taken during a period of invasion and loss of sovereignty. To this day, the majority of these items remain in the Vatican and have not been returned to their original homeland. So, the question remains, is preserving ancient heritage in foreign museums an act of cultural protection, or is it the continuation of imperial power under another name? The Vatican may claim these items as part of humanity's shared legacy, but for Egypt, they remain sacred fragments of memory, taken and never returned. The Forbidden Manuscript, First Apocalypse of James. In the year 2017, amid crumbling sheets of papyrus and discarded tax records from the year 5th century, archaeologists uncovered an ancient text that had been banned by the church for centuries. The manuscript is titled First Apocalypse of James, though its content directly concerns Jesus and his disciples. This document never appeared in any official version of the Bible. Perhaps that is because it contained ideas considered dangerous, ideas that challenged the dominant religious doctrines of the time. The manuscript, written in Greek on weathered papyrus, was discovered in an ancient rubbish heap near a monastery in Egypt. While it was found alongside mundane items like receipts for chariot rentals and invoices for donkey feed, the content of the manuscript carried profound religious and philosophical weight. It recounts secret teachings that Jesus imparted solely to James, a disciple portrayed as someone who had inherited deep knowledge about the true nature of existence. In this text, the world is not depicted as the creation of an all-powerful and benevolent God. Instead, it is said to have been formed by a malevolent being, a false deity who constructed reality as a prison for the human soul. This worldview runs counter to the entire foundation of traditional Christian theology and would have almost certainly been condemned as heresy at the time it was written. Some modern scholars have even noted the eerie resemblance between this idea and the concept of a virtual world seen in science fiction, such as The Matrix, where humanity lives in a fabricated reality controlled by an unseen force. Beyond its controversial message, the manuscript's physical form offers additional insight. The lines are evenly spaced, and each syllable is carefully marked, suggesting that it may have been used as a teaching tool. The fact that this text was found in a garbage heap rather than preserved in an archive or library says something about how dissident ideas were treated. It reflects how teachings that did not align with orthodoxy were not just exiled from religious life, but also erased from humanity's collective memory. Was the body of Alexander the Great hidden by the Vatican? For more than 2,000 years, the final resting place of Alexander the Great has remained one of history's greatest mysteries. Despite being one of the most powerful and revered figures of the ancient world, his tomb vanished without a trace. Archaeologists have searched in vain for centuries. But there is one highly controversial theory that offers a surprising explanation: that Alexander's body still exists, not in Egypt, but in Italy, hidden within one of Europe's most iconic churches. According to this theory, after Alexander the Great died in the year 323 BCE, his body was first buried in Memphis, Egypt, and later transferred to Alexandria, the city he himself had founded, and where he had wished to be laid to rest. For centuries, his tomb became a pilgrimage site for kings, emperors, and scholars alike. But at some unknown point in history, it disappeared entirely from the historical record. Some researchers believe that his body was not truly lost, but secretly relocated. The theory proposes that during the Middle Ages, a Venetian merchant smuggled Alexander's remains out of Alexandria and brought them to Italy. Upon arrival in Venice, the body was mistaken for that of St. Mark and was buried in St. Thiel. Mark's Basilica, which remains one of the most important religious destinations in Europe today. As bold as this theory may sound, it presents some thought-provoking arguments. First, After the year 4th century, there are no reliable records of Alexander's tomb, despite its previous renown. Second, the body entombed in St. Mark's Basilica has never undergone full scientific examination. Its identity has been accepted based on religious tradition and symbolic attribution, not on clear physical or historical evidence. Some argue that if this theory holds any truth, it would explain why no archaeological expedition has ever successfully located Alexander's tomb in Egypt, despite exhaustive efforts. Of course, to this day, no definitive proof has confirmed that the body in St. Mark's Basilica is, in fact, Alexander the Great. The Vatican has never released any DNA testing or detailed study of the remains held there. But the fact that such questions persist only underscores one thing: history is not always as certain as we think, and sometimes the greatest figures of the ancient world may vanish right before our eyes. The statue of Anubis in a Roman cloak. Inside a quiet room of the Vatican's Egyptian Museum, surrounded by ancient mummies and time-worn black stone sculptures, stands an artifact that often causes visitors to linger longer than usual. It is a finely carved marble statue, nearly life-sized, depicting the Egyptian god Anubis, the ancient deity who guarded mummies and guided souls into the afterlife. But what sets the statue apart is not just its craftsmanship. It is the strange detail that Anubis in this representation is not wearing traditional Egyptian garments, but rather a Roman cloak, holding in his hands both an ancient Egyptian musical instrument and the caduceus, the staff associated with Hermes in Greek mythology. This unusual blending of cultural symbols is no accident. It reflects a distinct period in Roman history, when the empire not only conquered Egypt by force, but also absorbed many of its religious rites, symbols, and ceremonial traditions. As part of this cultural fusion, deities were combined and reimagined to better integrate into the spiritual life of the Roman people. In this statue, Anubis still bears the jackal's head, but his body is that of a distinguished Roman citizen. In one hand, he holds the sistrum, a sacred rattle used in Egyptian rituals, and in the other, the caduceus of Hermes, symbolizing communication between the world of the living and the dead. This statue was not discovered in a temple or an archaeological site. Rather, it was crafted during the Roman era, likely as a decorative object intended for the home of a wealthy Roman patron. After centuries of changing hands, in the year 1749, the statue was gifted to Pope Benedict XIV, and it has since remained part of the Vatican's collection. This artifact beautifully illustrates how cultural exchange and conquest can lead to fascinating syncretism in religious art and iconography, showcasing the fluidity of belief systems across empires. The mummification of saints. In the minds of many Catholic believers, the incorruptibility of the human body after death has long been considered a sign of divine holiness. Some saints, after resting in the ground for years, were reportedly found in such pristine condition that many believed it to be a miracle. But in the modern era, not all such cases are the result of natural preservation. Within the Vatican, there has existed a process, quiet and methodical, for preserving the bodies of saints and popes using techniques inspired by the ancient Egyptian tradition of mummification. Between the year 1975 and the year 2008, a group of specialists appointed by the Vatican carried out preservation procedures on at least 31 saints and venerated figures. This process was never widely publicized, but over time, certain details have emerged. The goal was to prevent decomposition and ensure that the bodies could be displayed in churches as enduring symbols of faith and spiritual permanence. One of the most striking examples is Pope John XXIII, who died in the year 1963, when his body was exhumed in the year 2001 to be placed in a glass coffin inside St. Peter's Basilica. Observers were astonished by its condition. His face retained its gentle expression, his skin remained unblemished, and his hands were peacefully folded over his chest, as if he had just passed away. The Vatican did not confirm whether mummification had been used, but many experts believe his body had been carefully treated long before the public display. However, not every case went according to plan. One notable failure involved Pope Pius XII, who died in the year 1958. According to witnesses at the time, his body was improperly treated. When placed in a public viewing coffin, the corpse began to decompose rapidly. The odor was so overwhelming that a guard at the wake fainted. The Pope's nose collapsed, his skin darkened, and the funeral had to be cut short to avoid further scandal. The truth is that the Vatican has continued to preserve the remains of important religious figures. For them, it is not merely about maintaining physical form, it is about preserving memory, embodying faith, and sustaining the presence of individuals who once profoundly shaped the spiritual life of millions. The heart of St. Camillus de Lellis, a relic of compassion. In the Catholic world, certain relics are not only revered as sacred objects, but stand as living symbols of faith, love, and sacrifice. One such relic is preserved today in the city of Naples, the actual heart of St. Camillus de Lellis. Camillus de Lellis was born in the year 1550, under less than fortunate circumstances. His father served as a soldier in the Spanish Royal Army, and his mother died when he was still a young child. Raised in hardship and instability, Camillus spent many of his early years adrift, immersed in gambling and a reckless lifestyle. At one point, he became a mercenary and was expelled from religious communities multiple times for failing to observe their rules. Yet from the shadows of that life came a profound spiritual awakening. While receiving treatment for a wound at a hospital, Camillus became acutely aware of the pain, loneliness, and neglect suffered by the poor and sick. It was in that moment that he chose to transform his life entirely. He turned to faith, abandoned his vices, and began caring for the ill with a level of compassion rarely seen. Camillus was not merely a man of charity. In the year 1586, he founded a new religious order known as the Camillians, a group dedicated to serving the sick, the dying, and the forgotten. What made the Camillians extraordinary was their dual commitment to physical and spiritual care. They willingly entered plague zones, never feared death, and remained by the side of the suffering until the very end. Camillus once said, "Let your heart be in your hands when you serve the sick." This was not just a metaphor, it was the rule by which he lived. Camillus died in the year 1614 at the age of 64, having devoted his life entirely to the poor and the infirm. After his passing, it was decided that his heart would be preserved as a sacred relic. According to witnesses at the time, when surgeons removed his heart, they were stunned. It remained deep, red, full, and appeared as if carved from precious stone, rare condition, in a body that had ceased to function. Though no one dared to officially declare it a miracle, for those of faith, it was a clear sign of sanctity. The heart was placed inside a box made of juniper wood and transported to Naples, once a central hub of Camillian ministry. Over the centuries, it has been carefully preserved and displayed in a small chapel that once served as a clinic founded by Camillus himself. Today, that place has become a church, and pilgrims from around the world still journey there to witness the relic. To the Catholic Church, the heart of St. Camillus is not merely a preserved organ. It is proof of a life wholly given to love and service, an emblem of a heart that remained open always to embrace those in pain and in need of care. The Museum of the Holy Souls in Purgatory. In the heart of Rome lies a place few people know about. It is not a celebrated art museum or a grand cathedral, but rather a small, quiet, and haunting space. It bears a curious name, the Museum of the Holy Souls in Purgatory. This museum is located within a section of the Church of the Sacred Heart of Suffrage, Chiesa del Sacro Cuore del Suffragio. The church itself, built in the year 19th century in gray Gothic stone, sits humbly along a quiet street. On the 15th of November, the year 1897, a fire broke out in a small chapel within the church. The flames were quickly extinguished, but once the smoke cleared, something unusual was discovered. On a scorched section of the wall, priests and parishioners noticed what looked like the image of a human face, as if someone had reached out from the other side of the living world to leave a mark. The priest at the time, Father Victor Jouet, believed this was a sign from a soul in purgatory. Deeply moved by the discovery, Father Jouet became obsessed. He began collecting similar evidence not only in Rome but across various parts of Europe, wanting to understand whether souls trapped in purgatory were truly trying to communicate with the living. The result was a strange yet very real collection. Inside the museum, one can find dozens of objects prayer books, priestly garments, wooden tables, linen saul bearing mysterious burn marks, scorched handprints, fingerprint impressions, and shapes seemingly seared into them by fire. A prayer book shows a blackened handprint in its center. A linen apron bears deep, dark finger marks as if someone had clutched it in desperation. According to Catholic doctrine, purgatory is not hell. It is a place for souls who are not yet pure enough to enter heaven, but who are not condemned to eternal punishment either. It is a realm of purification, of cleansing sin before salvation. Crucially, souls in purgatory cannot help themselves. They depend on the living through prayers, masses, and acts of charity done in their name. This is why many believers hold that these souls may attempt to reach out, seeking aid from those still among the living. The marks left behind in this museum are seen as messages from beyond. Not everyone believes in purgatory or in the possibility of contact between the dead and the living, but the artifacts preserved in this museum compel visitors to pause and reflect. Whether seen as supernatural signs or psychological imprints, they remain enduring reminders of love, sorrow, and the mystery that lies between two worlds. The brain of Don Bosco. In the year 2017, a strange and unexpected theft occurred at a small shrine in Italy. The target wasn't gold, jewels, or priceless relics, but a fragment of a saint's brain. As unbelievable as it sounds, the story is true. The brain belonged to Saint John Bosco, one of the most revered figures in the history of modern Catholicism. John Bosco, affectionately known as Don Bosco, was born in the year 1815 in northern Italy. He grew up in poverty, lost his father at a young age, and began working early in life to support himself. But it was from these early struggles that he developed a deep compassion for poor, orphaned, and marginalized children. After becoming a priest, Don Bosco dedicated his life to helping young people, especially those society had deemed beyond saving. He opened schools, vocational workshops, and built an educational system that was both disciplined and compassionate. No child was beaten, no one was excluded. His approach to education later became the foundation of the Salesian order, which continues to serve youth around the world today. What made Don Bosco especially unique was his ability to reach children not just through textbooks but through performance and creativity. He knew magic tricks, performed acrobatics, and told captivating stories, all to capture the hearts of even the most difficult children. For this reason, he is also recognized as the patron saint of magicians. Don Bosco died in the year 1888. After his canonization in the year 1934, parts of his body were preserved as sacred relics and placed on display at the Basilica of Colle Don Bosco, built on the site of his birth. For decades, everything remained undisturbed until one summer afternoon in the year 2017. That day, a 42-year-old man secretly entered the shrine. He removed the sealed glass reliquary containing Don Bosco's brain and disappeared without a trace. The news quickly spread, sending shockwaves through the Catholic world. This wasn't just the theft of a religious artifact. It was a desecration of someone millions regarded as a symbol of faith and hope. The motive behind the theft later came to light. The perpetrator believed the relic container was made of solid gold and hoped to sell it on the black market. In reality, the brain fragment was encased in plain glass and wrapped in common materials with little monetary value. With the help of fingerprint evidence and security camera footage, authorities traced the suspect. Within days, they found the brain hidden inside a brass teapot in the man's apartment near the city of Turin. Fortunately, the seal on the relic had not been broken. After a thorough inspection, the sacred item was returned to the church and placed back on display for pilgrims and worshippers. Today, when people speak of Don Bosco, they remember not only the schools, the lives he saved, and the lessons and compassion he taught, but also this strange theft, which served as a reminder. Some relics may hold little material worth, but their spiritual value surpasses anything that can be measured. The sarcophagus of St. Helena. In the history of Christianity, there are figures whose importance doesn't lie in preaching sermons, founding denominations, or writing scripture, but in how their actions reshaped the very path of faith itself. St. Helena was one such figure. She was not a cleric nor a theologian, but the mother of Emperor Constantine, the first Roman ruler to legalize Christianity within the empire. And it was she who is believed to have discovered the true cross, the very cross upon which Jesus Christ was crucified. Helena was born around the year 250 AD into a humble, non-aristocratic family. She married a Roman general and would later give birth to Constantine. After her son rose to power as emperor, Helena was granted the title of Augusta, an honorary empress, but rather than embrace a life of imperial luxury, she chose a different path, one of faith and devotion. She converted to Christianity later in life and spent her remaining years on pilgrimages, building churches, and seeking out sacred relics. In the year 326, Helena arrived in Jerusalem on a spiritual mission. According to tradition, during her journey, she unearthed 3 wooden crosses buried beneath the ruins of a former pagan temple. To determine which one was the true cross, she instructed that each be placed upon a dying woman. When the 3rd cross was laid on her, the woman unexpectedly recovered, leading people to believe it to be a miracle. From that moment on, Helena was venerated as the woman who had rediscovered the crucifix. After her death around the year 330, her body was interred in a sarcophagus made of deep red porphyry, a stone so rare and precious that it was typically reserved for royalty and emperors. The sarcophagus itself is elaborately carved with scenes of soldiers, horses, and battlefields. Strangely, these images seem at odds with the life of faith and charity led by Helena. Some historians believe the tomb was originally crafted for Emperor Constantine himself, but was later reassigned to his mother, perhaps as his way of honoring the woman who had given him both life and faith. But Helena's journey did not end in peaceful rest. During the Middle Ages, a wave of relic fever swept through Europe. Churches, monasteries, and noble families all sought to possess bodily remains of the saints, believing they brought blessings and divine prestige. Helena became one of the many saints whose remains were caught in this frenzy. Her bones were gradually removed, divided, and scattered across various places. Today, part of her remains are kept in the Church of Saint-Leu-la-Forêt in Paris. Another portion is preserved at the Basilica di Santa Maria in Ara Coeli in Rome, and smaller fragments are said to reside in Trier, Germany, a city that once served as the western capital of the Roman Empire during Constantine's reign. The tale grows even more curious. Some records suggest that during the Fourth Crusade, Venetian warriors stole a part of Helena's remains and transported them to a small island named Santa Elena, where they built a church to house the relics as a sacred emblem of faith and victory. To this day, no one can say for certain whether these scattered remains all belong to the same woman, but perhaps that no longer matters. What makes Helena unforgettable is not the location of her bones, but the depth of her belief, her devotion, and the journey she began over 1,700 years ago to recover one of Christianity's most sacred symbols. The Pope's elephant. In the year 1514, Portugal was expanding its global trade influence. As a rising maritime empire, the Portuguese weren't just sending expeditions across the Indian Ocean. They also sought favor with the Pope in Rome, who held tremendous power in deciding how newly discovered territories would be divided among Catholic nations. To impress the Vatican, King Manuel I of Portugal organized a grand diplomatic mission to Rome. Among the lavish gifts, gold, jewels, silk, and spices, the one that left all of Rome speechless was a 4-year-old Asian elephant named Hanno. At a time when most Europeans had never seen an elephant, Hanno became an instant sensation. The elephant was brought from the port of Civitavecchia into the Vatican, passing through the crowded streets of Rome. People flooded the roads just to catch a glimpse of the strange creature. Many climbed onto rooftops, some of which collapsed under the weight of the crowds. The spectacle of Hanno moving through the city plunged it into chaos for several days. When Hanno finally arrived at the Vatican and appeared before Pope Leo X, the event became even more extraordinary. Draped in silk and bearing a small ceremonial tower on its back, Hanno bowed respectfully before the Pope, an act it had been carefully trained to perform. Then, as a unique gesture of greeting, the elephant sprayed water from its trunk, sending the crowd into a frenzy. Pope Leo X was instantly enchanted. For the next 3 years, Hanno lived on the Vatican grounds and was treated like an international celebrity. A special enclosure was built for him. Caretakers were hired, and artists were commissioned to paint and sculpt his likeness. Hanno became a living symbol not only of the exotic wonders beyond Europe, but also of the papacy's global reach and grandeur. But the joy would not last. In the year 1516, Hanno suddenly fell ill, though the exact cause remains unclear. Some historical accounts suggest the elephant may have been fed gold and other precious metals as part of a misguided royal diet. Whether due to superstition or naivete, This practice may have severely damaged Hanno's digestive system. Not long after, he died at the age of just 7. Pope Leo X was heartbroken. He wrote a moving elegy in Hanno's memory and had the elephant buried within the Vatican's Cortile del Belvedere. He also commissioned the famed artist Raphael to paint a fresco of Hanno to hang in the papal palace, ensuring this special friend would never be forgotten by the Eternal City. For centuries, Hanno's story faded from memory. But in the year 1962, during restoration work in the Vatican gardens, workers unexpectedly discovered a large, unusual elephant jawbone and teeth. After comparing the remains with historical records, experts confirmed these were the bones of Hanno, the legendary elephant who once mesmerized Rome more than 400 years earlier. The remaining bones are still preserved today, but the whereabouts of his 2 tusks remain a mystery. No one knows where they were taken, whether they hang silently in a private gallery or lie buried in some forgotten archive. The Devil's Face, a hidden mystery in Giotto's fresco. At the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi, home to one of Europe's most important collections of religious frescoes, a mystery has silently lingered for centuries. It wasn't until modern times, with the help of technology and keen observation, that people realized a demonic face was hidden among the clouds in one of the church's most revered paintings. The fresco in question is part of a series that illustrates the life of Saint Francis, the founder of the Franciscan order and one of Catholicism's most beloved saints. These frescoes have long been attributed to Giotto di Bondone, a master painter of the late 13th century, often considered the father of Renaissance art. Giotto was among the first artists to transform religious imagery from symbolic icons into lifelike human figures imbued with emotion, movement, and depth. However, in fresco number 20, depicting the death of Saint Francis, a demonic face was discovered lurking in a cloud near the center of the image. From the floor of the basilica, it is virtually impossible to see, but when the painting was magnified and examined closely, the face came into view, complete with horns, a hooked nose, and a sinister smile. Why would such an image appear in a sacred religious artwork? Some experts believe it may have been a mischievous prank by the artist, similar to how medieval painters occasionally left hidden fingerprints or secret messages within their work. Others suggest the demonic face could symbolize the presence of evil, lingering near the soul, a reminder that even at the moment of death, temptation, and darkness do not easily let go. There is even a theory that the artist may have used the likeness of a personal enemy to create the devil's face as a clever form of revenge preserved for eternity. But a deeper question remains. Was this fresco truly painted by Giotto himself? Some art historians argue that the style differs noticeably from his more widely accepted works, most notably the famous fresco cycle in the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua. They speculate that a student of Giotto's or perhaps another contemporary artist may have completed most of the work at Assisi. Yet regardless of who the true artist was, the demonic face remains. What is striking is that for centuries, millions stood before this painting praying, admiring, contemplating without ever noticing anything unusual. Only with the advent of modern imaging technology did this strange detail come to light. Today, the devil's face in the fresco is no longer a secret, but it remains an unsolved mystery. The Roman Curia, the government behind the Vatican. When most people think of the Vatican, they imagine a sacred place, the residence of the Pope, and the spiritual center of the Catholic Church. But few realize that behind that religious veil lies an organizational structure that functions much like a government. That structure is called the Roman Curia. It is the administrative body that assists the Pope in running the affairs of the Vatican. If the Pope were a president, then the Curia would be his cabinet. They are responsible for everything: appointing bishops, declaring saints, organizing major liturgical events, and handling complex matters of doctrine and faith. The Roman Curia is made up of 9 major departments known as congregations. The oldest among them is the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, established in the year 1542. In its early days, it operated as the Office of the Inquisition, the tribunal that judged those accused of heresy. Today, it still holds its core responsibility, defending the faith and doctrine of the Church. In addition, the Vatican maintains its own religious judicial system. One such body is the Supreme Tribunal of the Apostolic Penitentiary, which handles cases involving the gravest sins. The Vatican also operates 3 separate offices dedicated to working with different groups: Catholics, members of other religions, and even those who follow no religion at all. Many assume that the Vatican is merely a small religious center, but in truth, it functions as a sovereign state with its own laws, legal structures, and administrative systems. And the Roman Curia is the quiet government that keeps everything running smoothly behind those ancient walls. This complex administrative apparatus underscores the Vatican's dual nature as both a spiritual and temporal power. The secretive economy of the Vatican. The Vatican is the smallest country in the world, yet its economy remains one of the most curious and least understood. No one knows exactly how much money the Vatican possesses, but everyone agrees it's a great deal. The largest source of income comes from a global donation known as Peter's Pence. This tradition began in the year 8th century, when Catholics around the world were encouraged to give a small portion of their wealth to support the Pope and the Church's mission. That practice continues to this day. Every time you drop a few coins into the collection box at your local parish, it's very possible that money makes its way back to the Vatican. But what's even more intriguing is that the Vatican doesn't just hold its wealth, it invests it. Funds entrusted to the Pope are managed and invested across various sectors, including stocks, bonds, real estate, and even the New York Stock Exchange. The Vatican's investment portfolio spans everything from European financial firms to high-value properties in London and Paris. It also holds shares in major banks and global investment companies. However, the Vatican doesn't invest carelessly. It follows clear ethical guidelines, avoiding funding companies that produce contraceptives, weapons, or operate in morally questionable industries. In addition, the Vatican generates revenue through other channels such as the sale of stamps, commemorative coins, museum tickets, and religious souvenirs. With millions of tourists visiting each year, admission fees from the Vatican museums alone contribute significantly to its income. Still, despite its strong investment presence and lucrative returns, the Vatican keeps its financial figures tightly guarded. Only in recent years, under the leadership of Pope Francis, have some reforms been introduced to bring greater transparency to its financial affairs. The secretive economy highlights the immense financial power wielded by the Holy See, which allows it to maintain its independence and global influence. The treasure in the vault is the Vatican hiding gold from Jerusalem. It's well known that the Vatican houses a vast collection of documents and sacred relics. But some believe that hidden deep beneath those ancient stone corridors lies something even more extraordinary. One of the greatest religious treasures in human history, the lost treasure of the Jerusalem Temple. According to certain researchers, most notably Professor Tom Meyer, a biblical scholar from California, the sacred artifacts once held in the Jewish Temple of Jerusalem may have been looted by the Romans in the year 70 AD after they attacked the city and destroyed the holy site. Millions of Jews were killed, and priceless religious objects such as the 7-branched golden menorah, the altar, and other temple treasures were taken. No one knows for certain what happened to those artifacts, but according to some theories, they were transported to Rome, passed through generations, and ultimately ended up in the hands of the Vatican. And if that were true, the most secure place to hide such items would be in the Vatican's underground vaults area, completely off limits to all, but a very small group of carefully selected individuals. There is no concrete evidence to confirm this theory, yet the idea has endured for centuries. Those who believe it claim that the Vatican may very well be hiding the most valuable items ever taken from the temple. Of course, the Vatican has never acknowledged any connection to such a treasure, and no one is allowed unrestricted access to its subterranean archives. That secrecy only fuels the speculation. After all, the less the world knows, the more reason there is to suspect that something truly extraordinary may be hidden away, just out of reach. Murder within the Vatican, a secret still unresolved. On May the 4th, the year 1998, a shocking event unfolded in the very heart of the Vatican, a place long considered one of the holiest and safest locations in the world. The recently appointed commander of the Swiss Guard, Alois Estermann, along with his wife, Gladys Meza Romero, was found dead in their apartment inside Vatican City. Lying near their bodies was a young guardsman named Cedric Tournay, who had also died from a gunshot wound to the head. According to the official statement released by the Vatican, Cedric was responsible for killing Esterman and his wife, allegedly due to a personal conflict, before turning the weapon on himself. The motive, according to Vatican officials, was rooted in Cedric's anger over not receiving a medal after being disciplined for violating military rules. They claimed he had lost control of his emotions and committed the violent act in a fit of rage. But what raised public suspicion was how swiftly the case was closed, and the fact that all information came solely from Vatican sources. Why was such a serious murder investigation wrapped up so quickly? Some journalists and researchers uncovered clues suggesting that Esterman may have been connected to sensitive internal affairs, possibly involving political ties or financial secrets within the Vatican. For many, the incident seemed far more complex than the version presented to the public. The abrupt conclusion and tight control of information have fueled enduring speculation that the official narrative concealed a deeper, more troubling truth within the Holy See's inner circles. Where did all this gold come from? Part of it comes from centuries of donations. Another portion has been accumulated through investments and financial returns. But a significant share originates from the Church's long and powerful history, when the Vatican stood at the center of European authority and amassed enormous wealth during the Middle Ages. Today, people may debate how the Vatican chooses to use its resources, but one thing is undeniable. The Vatican is one of the wealthiest institutions on the planet, and the gold it holds ensures its financial strength under any circumstance. This immense wealth provides not only stability, but also a hidden dimension of power and influence that extends far beyond the spirit